Sex is not something you do when you're young. It's not something you do because you're beautiful. It has nothing to do with youth or beauty or even relationships or dating.
Na een lange relatie werd ze gedumpt, schrijver Emily Witt. Ze vroeg zich af wat er nog meer is onder de zon en dompelde zich onder in de wereld van online daten, open relaties en internetporno. Hier op het Brainwash Festival, het grootste denkfestival in Nederland, doet ze verslag van haar ontdekkingstocht.
Hi. What does it mean to value sexual experience? How should we think about our own sexual experience? We celebrate when a couple completes 30 years of marriage. We don't celebrate when a person celebrates his 30th anniversary of watching porn. On your 20th Tinder date, your parents don't give you a kitchen stand mixer or a pile of new towels. Sexual experience is something we fear might corrupt or tarnish our sense of ourselves. It's not always seen. It's not like a course of study that you might undergo, the way you would study how to bake bread or play tennis. 6 years ago, I started working on a book. It's called Future Sex. And I began the book the year I turned 30, at a time when I was starting to feel disappointed that my youthful sexual experience was not coming to an end. I had, like many people of my generation, enjoyed sexual freedom during my teens and my 20s. I was able to talk about contraception with my mom and date freely and have relationships and end relationships. But I was always waiting for that time in my life to end. And when it wasn't ending, when I turned 30, I felt some disappointment and also some worry. What would I do with this sexual freedom for the rest of my life? Would I just keep dating, having these relationships that began and ended? I felt worried that I would never reach a point of culmination, a sense of having moved along the trajectory of adult life that I had expected. So I decided to take a look at some communities of people that were enjoying their sexual freedom in a way that I had not. I'm a journalist by profession, and it was easy for me, therefore, to use journalism as a kind of alibi in this exploration. I could go meet with pornographers or people that practice something called orgasmic meditation, and I would be going as a journalist, which gave me a kind of official reason for being there and not a reason of personal inquiry. And in wondering about this now, I think I didn't value my own experience. I was of those people who thought that sex was something you had to be very careful with, and if you let yourself ask too many questions or have too many experiences, maybe you would come out disillusioned or somehow spoiled for love. I began my inquiry by going to meet a group of hardcore BDSM pornographers at a company called kink.com in San Francisco. Again, I was there as a journalist, but I was also willing to suspend judgment and even have my consciousness disturbed for the purpose of understanding this new world and why it existed and what people found there. I attended a shoot called Public Disgrace that was probably the worst nightmare of the anti-porn feminists of the 1980s. It was the most misogynistic porn you could imagine. The fantasy was a woman walks into a bar and she gets insulted and groped, and another performer has sex with her, and it's very, it's cruel. It feels cruel when you're watching it, and I worried about what it meant. Afterward, I interviewed the performer and the director, who was also a woman. And they told me why they were there, that for them, they had been taught their whole lives to fear certain sexual experiences. And here they had created an environment in which they had total control. And they could push their bodies to certain limits and know that they were bigger than the fear. And all of this, I started to wonder why I hadn't ever let myself consider even kind of vanilla porn. I wasn't somebody that watched it. I thought it was for men. And why I was so scared to ask very basic questions about who I thought I was. So that was the first experience I had where I began to sense I might not know my own reality very well. The next place I went to visit was a group in San Francisco called One Taste that practices something called orgasmic meditation. This was a very new agey group that had a lot of jargon, and you went to their workshops and you'd have to make sustained eye contact and give people back rubs, and that stressed me out a little bit. And then there was the practice itself, orgasmic meditation. Two people would sit together in a room on the floor, a woman and a partner. The woman would take off her pants. The partner would stroke her clitoris for 15 minutes using a timer. When the timer went off, they would stop. They would talk a little bit about their feelings, and then they would put their clothes back on and go about their day. And the idea of this was that it was something you could do with friends, that this process, orgasmic meditation, or OM, as they called it, would be as easy as asking someone to have a cup of tea. So I was both skeptical and uncomfortable about trying this, but I tried it. And I came to understand that the idea of it was to create a space that was neither a solo sexual practice like masturbation, nor something you do as part of a couple where you have an expectation of reciprocity and pleasing the other person, and perhaps you're all worried about how you look or how your armpits smell or whatever it is. This was in this strange structure. Women in particular were being asked to consider the feelings in their body, make demands, ask the person to change the pace of the stroking or add more pressure or something like that. And it gave people a space in which to contemplate their sexuality that hadn't been there before. And I began to understand that I had often experienced sexual overtures or even my own sexual attraction in a public space maybe as a source of panic or anxiety. And being in this weird group of people taught me a little bit how to know my own body better. And again, I emerged from the second experience from having learned something. And I began to realize I'm a writer. I treat writing like a very serious course of study. I read a lot. I critique myself. I make mistakes. I try to work as much as possible. And I know that that's what makes me a good writer. I had never thought of my sexuality that way. I thought it was innate. I thought it was natural. Whatever I felt was natural. It came to me from birth or something. And through these two experiences, I was starting to realize maybe I had made a mistake. The next group of people I visited, also in San Francisco, were a group of young 20-somethings who practiced polyamory. Probably most of you are now familiar with that word. It means that you believe in the possibility of being in love with more than one person at once and having more than one boyfriend or girlfriend at the same time. When I met these people, they were young. They were in their early 20s. They had attended the best universities in the United States. They worked at Google, which meant they made a lot of money. And I was so surprised that people that were so corporate and not rebellious, really, were undertaking this experiment. And I also thought, as somebody that was born in the 1980s to parents who had lived through the 60s, that the knowledge that had been passed down to me was the last time people tried these experiments, they failed. And yet here are these young people willing to test their emotions in the pursuit of living a more original life. And I spent a lot of time with them. I watched the dedication they had to communication, to openness, to honesty, the work they put into describing their emotions with each other. And the fearlessness they really had when it came to the pursuit of love, and the confidence they had that they could overcome any emotional obstacle. And this was so different from how I felt. When I was in relationships, I often felt terrified. I felt vulnerable. Being in love for me was scary because I was always scared the person would fall in love and leave me or whatever it was. And these people seem to have found tools to overcome that fear. And I started to notice a pattern that the pornographers had a sexual confidence with their bodies and ease with being nude and excitement about trying new things that I had never had. The orgasmic meditators were kind of kooky, but they at least were so specific and unembarrassed when it came to talking about the feelings in their bodies. The polyamorous were trying something that was difficult, and it took a lot of conversation, so much conversation that it started to feel really unsexy sometimes. But they didn't live in a world of secrets and lies. And I started to realize that the kind of cloistered, avoiding experience that I had sought for myself in the hope that it would somehow pay off in a monogamous long-term relationship was not the best way of approaching sexuality. I finished my book. I fell in love. I live with my boyfriend now. But the inquiry that I undertook taught me that sex is not something you do when you're young. It's not something you do because you're beautiful. It has nothing to do with youth or beauty or even relationships or dating. That's one part of it. But understanding your sexuality can happen by reading a book. It can happen by watching porn. It can happen by going to a sex party. It can happen by having a conversation with a friend. It can happen by considering the practices of people with other sexual identities than you, and suspending judgment, again, letting your consciousness be disturbed, even letting yourself feel uncomfortable. And the outcome of that for me was a confidence that I may end up alone, I may end up unattractive, but I know how to pursue sexuality, and I know how to find my place in the world without the old tropes of dating and romance. Thank you.
Ik heb Emily Witt gezien. Ik herken die drang naar zo'n zoektocht niet zo. Maar ik vond het wel mooi dat ze eindigde dat seksualiteit iets is dat ook buiten een relatie kan bestaan.
In mijn eigen relationele leven is ook veel veranderd de laatste tijd. En ik merk dat ik zelf ook wel denk van, dat ik niet helemaal per se geloof in dat voor altijd met één persoon. En dat ik benieuwd ben wat voor andere opties er nog zijn.
Human.